Hi, everyone. Welcome to our May 2024 Bicep community call. I can skip through these. Basically, in short, it's for you guys, this community call. We want to be able to talk to you guys directly and share things that we otherwise wouldn't share on a month-to-month basis. Cool. So for our O.27 release, we didn't have too many features released in O.27, but here are some of our bug fixes. So the first one, dot property access on union of objects with undeclared properties. This bug came up during our O.27 release when we allowed validation for property access on union types. An error came out when a property within an object is empty in one of the cases, or type validation can't read the value. So now it should be fixed, but please let us know if the problem still occurs. Yeah. And the second bug, allow importing from Bicep templates with required parameters. We found that importing variables into Bicep param files from an ARM template or Bicep template, imported variable declarations were not evaluated if the Bicep file had any required parameters. So it would return an error if that happened. So that should be fixed now. Yeah, let us know if it's not. And the last one, support spread completions inside ternary and parenthesized expressions. One of our users found that Intellisense wouldn't pop up when using the ternary operator. So we implemented support for this, which the Intellisense will now pop up for. Yeah, let us know if any Intellisense doesn't pop up. Usually means that we haven't added support for it. And yeah, we could add support for anything that doesn't have Intellisense pop up. Cool. That's it for our O.28 release. Nothing new on our future releases. Things are getting pushed out a little bit, unfortunately, since we have other priorities that have come up recently. So yeah, not too many changes in the future releases. All right, to our first topic, Stephen.
Okay. Let me share. Did I share the right screen?
I don't think so. All I see is black.
Yeah, let me try again.
While Stephen is pulling up his screen, I see Santosh, your hand is coming up and down. Is that intentional?
No, by mistake, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, you should be able to see it now. I will assume that no comment means we're good. So, thanks. So I have been exploring ways of providing Intellisense for modules published to private registries. So right now, if you are trying to complete a public module like this, then you get nice Intellisense for what's actually available. You can get descriptions and so forth for each of those. When you specify, on select one, you get completion for the versions available. But if you're doing this for private registries, we currently don't have any support for that. So, like I said, I've been exploring some possible ways of getting that to work in a reasonable manner. And the main requirements that I've considered here are that it needs to be scalable, because we do know that some registries have a huge number of entries. It'd be interesting to know if any of those actually contain Bicep modules, which I nicely misspelled here. So comments on that would be interesting as well. And we're trying not to rely on Azure functionality. We don't currently support modules outside of Azure, but that might open up in the future. So just as background for the performance issues here, It's pretty fast to get a list of all of the repositories in a registry. So here's an example. It's a single call. It does have to be repeated for paging purposes. Say every 100 or so, you may have to make a new call, but it's fast. But all you get is a list of the actual repository names and paths. Trying to list, however, all the Bicep modules, and from that is more difficult because for each of these repositories, we don't know what it is. We don't know what kinds of artifacts are in there, so we have to make additional calls to retrieve the tags and the manifest in each of those to determine if it's actually a Bicep module. So given that, some of the high-level options that we've considered, one is, well, maybe this isn't worth the effort for the experience. So please let us know if you don't think this is a big deal. Second would be to brute force, like I just mentioned here. So given a registry, we would need on the client to actually generate the list of repositories and then inspect each one individually to figure out what the Bicep ones are. Of course, we would cache this on the client, but it would have to be updated occasionally. And if you've got a large number of repositories, especially if they're not Bicep modules, then we're adding a lot of load to the registry itself. And of course, it'd be very slow on the client as well. With most of these, we could narrow it down somewhat. So this would also be interesting to know, do people always publish Bicep modules under a certain prefix, for instance? And if so, say the repository name starts with Bicep / would that mean that everything under Bicep is a Bicep repository? If there's even a regex pattern that could be specified, then we could narrow that down, and it might actually be a reasonable solution. So information on that would be useful. The second would be to use the brute force, but do it once or do it centrally, say nightly in a process. So essentially creating an index that could be published, which is essentially what we do right now for the public modules. There's a published index which just lists them out, and so it's a single JSON file we can download. So this could be, as the simplest would be users have to create their own, they just point us to it, or we could provide a tool inside Bicep that would create an index or update an index. Again, maybe we can narrow down the search path. And that, that could either be run by the user manually or centrally on a scheduler or whatever. It does mean, of course, that they have to have write permissions to generate the cache. Then we were looking at some ways of trying to do this quickly without actually having to make all the individual calls to the repositories. In other words, the hope was that we could just use the list of repository names, period, just make that one call and use that to figure out what we put in the Intellisense. And the easiest solution there is that we just assume that every repository is a Bicep module, or could be, and we show it in Intellisense. Again, if it's possible to narrow it down and say, all repositories under this path are Bicep modules, then again, that would be a great solution. Or if there's any kind of regex. So that's a simple one. And then the next three are variations where we can tell from a repository name what the Bicep modules are. The first one is we munge the repository name. So if the user is publishing this module, module 1, what we actually create in the registry would be this. So module 1.bicep. And so from the user's perspective, from the bicep file, they would still call it module 1. So what the user sees in programming versus what they see in the registry would be slightly different. But it would allow us to easily just say from the list of repos, well, this ends in .bicep. We will put it in Intellisense. So some of the cons with that are like I said, there would be a difference in what they see versus what they program with. There might be some ambiguity if they both exist, modules that were published from an older version of Bicep. We would also have to break forwards compatibility. That's not necessarily a big issue. We can work around that to an extent, but there are possible issues there. The next two are, instead of munging the repository name, we actually create a secondary repository. So if the user publishes module 1, we also create a repository with the name module1.bicep. And so similar, we'd go through and find all the .bicep repositories. And if there's one with the same name without the suffix, then we know that it's a bicep repository. The main con with that is there's no cleanup. So now of course we don't, in Bicep, you can't unpublish a module, but you could do it, through the registry. And if you clean up one, and if you delete one and don't delete the other, then, might or might not be an issue, but it is likely to happen. There's a way to have references in OCI compliant registries, or at least recent ones, where you can link two of them together. So one is deleted, the other is, but unfortunately, it only works within the same repository, so that wouldn't help us here. And the last one is just a variation on number 2, where all the semaphore repos are placed under a specific location. Just it clutters up the registry a little bit less, but it does mean that you would need permissions to both locations in order to publish. Also, it'd make the cleanup issue harder because they wouldn't be in the same location. So that one is probably out. So never see comments while we're going through this. So it'd be great. Yeah, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to go through the comments during this. Can I maybe get anybody that would like to speak to them? If not, I'll ask some follow-up questions. Yeah, Stan.
For me, I think it's the simplest way, just listing everything, and people can, if they keep something besides bicep there, they can just use some kind of prefix for them to be able to distinguish them. But for me, the simplest one, and basically not relying on anything special, is the best one. In our registry, we just keep only bicep files.
Okay. So just simply assume, I guess, this optimistic index, as I was calling it. Okay. Yeah. Is there anybody where that would be an issue? I guess add that to the chat if you would, if that solution would not work for you. Hood, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, where is the index building happening? Is that something that would just be happening in VSCode or something?
I mean, that could be done multiple ways. I've got that broken down here. So if it's something like this, then we would each client, each VSCode extension client would pull down the catalog and then cache it locally. So in that case,
Sure.
it's not really an index. If
'Cause
we're
I
going
guess,
with,
well, so I guess because I was thinking, just to finish up my comment, I know there was a mention of not making this necessarily Azure specific, but it seems like if I just published a module to ACR, I potentially want to benefit from the updated Intellisense immediately, rather than necessarily waiting for some overnight or longer term process to figure it out. So if you could have something that, like an event grid subscription of sorts that says here's a list of modules to look at, not necessarily just prefix, but just here's a list of them, in a config file, and respond to, hey, this has received an update in the ACR. Something like that might be a useful trigger. I don't know.
so as far as I know, there's no way to get an event when something has changed. So we'd have to actually pull down the catalog again. I was intending to see if there might be a way from the completion list to have an item that trips a refresh, or maybe a menu context that trips a refresh. Otherwise, I don't currently have a good solution to that, but it's certainly on the radar. Does that answer the question?
Sure.
Okay.
I
Now,
see
if
there is at least a schema for an image push event.
is there? Okay, I'll look into it.
Paste it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and there's several suggestions in the chat as well. Stephen, if you want to look at Bernie, your hand's up.
But event
Yeah,
grid is Azure specific, right?
I'm sorry.
It is.
And
Say-
because you wanted to have something that is not specific to Azure, but event grid is something specific to Azure.
That might be okay. Of course, yeah. Okay, good
Yeah,
to
I
know.
guess I was just gonna say that I think probably like either just look like listing all repositories, or having just a filtering mechanism within the Bicep config, would probably meet most customers' needs, I would say, would be my thought process. But yeah, I mean, the other approach is you could also potentially just do it based on customers that are configured module aliases within the Bicep config. Again, probably most customers that then are using like a large quantity of modules would probably have them prefixed as a module alias. But yeah, that would be my thoughts anyway.
Okay, so I'm hearing then a lot of support for this. Again, what I call the optimistic index. So essentially, in the Bicep config of each project, they would need to specify use, for this this registry, look for any repositories with this file name pattern or prefix, and then list everything that we find.
Yeah,
Cool.
essentially, unless you've got the filter in place, in which case then just use a prefix, right?
Sorry, could you repeat that
I
one?
just Yeah, so unless you have like a filter in place or something like that, like a Bicep config filter or something, where you could basically just put a prefix in. So I guess unless you have the filter in place, then try to list everything, which obviously, I think probably in a lot of cases, from what I've seen, I guess customers would either have a dedicated Bicep repository, or they would have a reasonably mature environment whereby they have all things organized under specific prefixes. So probably either of those two will work. If they've got a really large registry, then they can just filter it down.
Okay, so the default behavior would be we list all repositories that we find, don't bother looking to see if they're Bicep. And if users want to filter that, then they can add the filter to the Bicep config file, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that is the simplest solution. So yeah, so if that would not work for anybody, please let us know in the chat. If you have other suggestions or prefer one of the other solutions, let me know as well. And I appreciate the time. Is there anybody else that wanted to specifically add some voice comments? Okay, great. Then I'll be going through the chats later. I will also add a link to the notes that I had up here. I'll add that to chat. And back to Stephanie. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone, giving feedback. We always really, really appreciate you taking the time to let us know what you think. I am resharing the PowerPoint. Hopefully that works. Yeah, Dan, do you want to share on your end, or unfortunately, I can't give control because I am sharing just the window and not the PowerPoint itself. I'm not
Helps
sure.
if I unmute. I can share as well.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
So let me see if
Sure.
that will work. Let's see, where are we? Okay, well, folks, anyone who hadn't heard, last week we announced the public preview of Bicep template support for Microsoft Graph. It's something our team, Jason, Eric, Adam, and myself are really excited about. We hope you all are excited about it too. For anyone who hasn't heard, I'm just going to do a little brief overview. We added support in the VSCode Bicep extension to give folks the kind of authoring experiences they're used to in Bicep, but now for a core set of Microsoft Graph Entra resources like groups and applications and service principals. And so now you can author those things. You can author those side by side with Azure resources. And like in this example, you can add a managed identity as a member or an owner of a group. So now you can have these scenarios that cross both Azure and Entra infrastructure, and then you can take that Bicep file, deploy it in your usual way, and the extensibility model recognizes when there's a Microsoft Graph resource, sends it to our extension, and then that translates it into a Microsoft Graph request. And so none of this would have been possible without the great work that the Azure deployments team did to enable this kind of extensibility. So big shout out to those folks. And I'll say a little bit more in a moment, but we also have Pamela Fox on this call here. And so thank you very much, Pamela, for agreeing to come and talk to this audience at the last minute. Pamela is going to do a demo for us and also talk about a feature that isn't available yet, but if you haven't seen it, this is a sneak peek. So Pamela, if you want to take control, please feel free to do so, or share your screen, whichever way you want to go here.
There we go. All right, so I just shared my screen because I want to show VSCode and the portal. So you got that? Can you see that now? Yeah? All right.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So What I'm going to show is how we can use this new Microsoft Graph Bicep in order to create a user authentication for our apps on Azure and do it entirely in Bicep. And it's really, really cool how simple this is. So I'm very excited to see it actually, make it into some sort of public usable form. So here we have, this is Bicep using the new graph provider. And this is creating a Microsoft Graph application, which is, an Entra application registration. So this is what you need to do in order, if you're trying to set up some sort of, OAuth or OIDC flow using Entra, you would, create this application. In the past, I've made this using the Graph SDK. I've made it using the Azure CLI, all sorts of different ways of making these. But now we can make this with Bicep. And this is already, this part here is already possible in what's been released. So, we set up the redirect URIs, and these are the special URIs that correspond to the built-in authentication feature of app service and container apps. And all this here sets us up so we can use it for a user login with OIDC. So what this corresponds to in the portal is creating this application here, right? So, if you've done any sort of auth, you've probably seen this before. Now, the interesting thing is, what do we do for the credentials? Because traditionally, your credential has to be a certificate or a secret. Now, secrets or passwords are not at all supported by the new Bicep provider. Certificates, we did figure out a crazy way of doing them using Key Vault deployment scripts, and there is a sample for that in the repo if you want to see that. But what I want to show you is, this sneak preview is using a managed identity as a federated credential. And so you can actually see there's actually a third tab here which shows federated credentials, and that is actually the credential that I'm using here. And it's so much cleaner, so much nicer than certificates and client secrets, because we don't have to, store anything in a key vault. We don't have to worry about secrets leaking. And this is how we set it up, right? So we say we're making a federated identity credential. We give it some unique name. We set the audience to this value here. We set the issuer, and the issuer in this case is, well, we can see, I can show you the issuer here when we click through. So we see the issuer is, that's probably my tenant ID. I have to remember how issuers work. I set it all the way over in here. Issuer, yeah, there we go. That's a login endpoint and your tenant ID, right? So we set the issuer, and the subject is the system identity we want to use. So in this case, I am using the identity of the app service app. So if we look at my app service app in Bicep, I created a user assigned identity. I assigned that as the identity of this app. And so we're saying, okay, use the identity of this app for the federated identity credential. So this would mean that this app service app can use this app registration via its managed identity. So that's cool. So that sets up this app here. So the next thing we can do is that once we've got this all set up, the next thing we want to do is actually use the app service built-in auth feature. So the way we can do that is we can do use this web/site/config, and this is something we've been able to do in the past, but in the past we had to specify like where our secret was or our certificate was. Now we tell it that we tell it that the secret is this special value, which is override use MIFIC assertion client ID. Okay, so it's got to be this special value. And if we look back at the app service one, you can see that I did set that special that special secret to the client ID of the user assigned identity. So there's a little bit of magic that happens here where you need to store it in the right place and match them up. But then if you do, the app service built-in auth now knows that, hey, you are going to be using this federated identity, the managed identity as a federated identity credential, and you don't need to have secrets or certificates. So I can show you how that looks in the actual app. So here's our app, here's the user assigned identity for it, and then if we click on authentication to see how the authentication is set up, we can see these are the authentication settings. This is that app registration that we created with Bicep, And if we click on here, we can see that it's, it's storing, it's looking there for the client ID, and then it's all set up. So that way we can do login to my amazing, amazing website. So first let me log out using the, the log out, and then let me log back in. You can override that beautiful page there. So let me log back in and get the password. And this is where I go through my super fancy flow and try to remember my way too long master password while on screen. Oh God, I made this.
You're
way
on a
too
Mac.
long.
Do you have a? Oh, sorry about the echo.
Oh, can I do? Whoa, can I?
Fingerprint.
I have to change it. Fingerprint. I've never tried that. Is that what this button is? Nope. Oh,
That's
no.
how I do it
Okay.
on 1Password on my Mac.
Oh, okay.
But now I'm screwing you up, so I'll shut up.
Yeah. I've never. Yeah, people said I didn't want the touch bar, so I didn't do it. I think you need the touch bar for that, right? I find the touch bar super annoying. Here we go. All right. Thank you. It's one of those things where you don't like remember it until you do. Okay. All right, there we go. And then I think I have to change it anyway because it flashed. Okay, now we go to the Microsoft Authenticator app. As you can see, this is super secure, but luckily App Service is doing it all for me so that I don't have to, implement this from scratch. Here we go. That's my code. There we go. Signed in. And ta-da, all of that to get back in. But I think this is really, really cool because you can do this all in Bicep. So, this is going to work with built-in auth for app service. It's going to work with built-in auth for container apps because that's essentially the same feature. I don't think we have built-in auth for any of our other Azure hosts, but if you are using app service or container apps, this is a really, really nice option to very quickly, with automation, put apps behind a user authentication wall. Now, a big note is that this isn't going to work locally, right? I can't test out my authentication locally since, it's a managed identity. It's not my own identity. And because I am using the app service built-in auth, but for production apps that are on app service or container apps, this is going to be really, really nice. Okay, and that's all I wanted to show. There's stuff in the slides if you want to refer back, and you can see my actual branch that does all this on GitHub if you're curious to see the actual code changes. And you will be able to use these with the MSL SDKs, but once again, it's only going to work when you have that managed identity, which means it's only going to work on a production machine that has that managed identity. All right, that's all.
Thank you very much, Pamela. That was an awesome demo and a great walkthrough of managed identity as a federated identity credential. Just to clarify, we want this feature available last year. We wish it was available now. The team that owns this feature is working to bring it to public preview. We don't have any exact dates for it yet, but hopefully we'll see it soon. So stay alert for that. Seem to be having trouble sharing the PowerPoint now. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So wish we could. This thing is not working for me. There we go. Is that working? Yeah. Okay, so a little bit of a call to action for those of you who have already tried out the Graph Bicep extension. Thank you very much. We really appreciate all the feedback and the issues that you filed, whether it be about our public documentation or the functionality or the authoring experience. All of it is super valuable, and our team is going to strive to continue to improve the experiences that you get with the Microsoft Graph extension. So for those of you who haven't tried it yet, remember aka.ms/graphbicep, and that will take you to our doc site with all the information to get started. We have some quick starts, and like Pamela said, our GitHub repo has yet more template code samples as well. So please go ahead and give it a try. The GitHub repo is also the place where you can go and file issues, request new features, and maybe just as importantly, request new graph bicep types. And this is really important for us. If there's a bicep type that you're expecting for your scenarios that we don't currently support, please file an issue for that. Or if you see an issue already, go and upvote that. That will really help us prioritize getting support for those bicep types. So thank you. Please try it out. And back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions or feedback that they wanted to give? You can raise your hand, get off mute, and talk directly to the MS Graph team. Yeah, Jacob?
Is there any special extensions needed for this? It looks like you just need the latest Bicep version.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct. Just get the latest Bicep version. I think you have to enable extensibility, and
that's right.
Then and then in your Bicep file, you need to say provide a Microsoft Graph to basically let it know that you'll have some Microsoft Graph resources in your file. Otherwise, you won't get Intellisense and stuff like that. So that's all in the quick starts and stuff. So
thank you.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions on how to enable that, it's one of the experimental features that you put in the Bicep config.
Yep.
Yeah. What?
Following up on someone else's question, what permissions does the deploying entity need to do anything with Graph?
Yeah, so we have a topic on that in the public docs, but just to summarize here, you have to have whatever permissions are required by Graph, right? So so let's say you're deploying groups in your template, then you have to grant your application the one of the groups permissions that allows creation of groups. In the case where you're doing an interactive deployment, we only currently support Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell, and both of those applications are already pre-authorized for the necessary permissions to go deploy Entra resources or create Entra resources. When you do things in app-only mode, your service principal or your app needs to be granted the correct app-only permissions. Does that help, Whit?
Yes.
Oh, and sorry, I forgot one important thing. In the interactive mode, the signed-in user needs to be in needs to have the correct privileges in order to create those objects that are defined in the Bicep template file. I'll put a link to the permissions topic as well in the chat.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? There's a question in chat. Are permissions available via type or only GUID or GI?
So Chris, is that question about when you create an application and you're specifying the required resource access information, or when you're granting? Okay, whether you need to specify with GUID? Yes, it is all in GUID, I'm afraid. There's actually there's actually an issue raised on our repo about this. It is all with the permission ID. There are ways to look it up, and there is actually, at least for Microsoft Graph, documentation that lists all the friendly permission names and what they map to in terms of permission IDs. But yeah, it'd be better if we could reference those things using the friendly names.
I know that we've had a discussion about this in the past with regards to, it's failing me right now, RBAC roles, right? Where, and Alex is smiling there. Where we are, we're trying to figure out the best way to do that, whether that's through an include library or something to that extent. Again, now that we've got 2 or 3 of these things that are all GUID to, friendly names, we should probably try and figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, look,
and not you got your team specifically, but as a Bicep group in general.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be happy to look at that from my own personal view, being someone that works on the Microsoft Graph API. I would prefer that it's handled better in the core Graph API. That way, it's not only a better experience for folks who are using Bicep, but folks who use any of the other languages or developer interaction models, whether it's REST or SDKs, PowerShell, CLI, they will all get a better experience.
No, absolutely, so, that would be the best.
But if we can't do that, then I agree. We should try and figure out something in Bicep that makes it much friendlier and easier for authors.
No, as long as we're all thinking about it, we'll figure it out. Yeah. I know we will. I trust you guys. You guys are great.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question in chat. Are there plans to incorporate this with the portal so that portal deployments produce templates of things like app registrations?
I guess that somewhat depends on extensibility.
Yes. Okay.
If that's something that's really important, then yeah, I guess as a combined V team, that's something we can look at and see if we can support it.
Is that an ask, like if I were to do a template export from the portal on a resource group, to also include the graph resources in that exported template or Bicep file? Sorry, I'm not sure who answered the question or asked the question.
Philip asked the question. Do you want to answer that unmuted, or if you want to answer that in chat, either one works.
Oh, I got distracted. Can you repeat the question, please?
So was your ask in the chat about being able to export, like if you go to export an ARM template today, you get ARM resources, is the ask in the same flow to also get the graph resources at that point?
Yeah, I was asking if the plan was to incorporate this new feature into that standard existing feature that exists in the portal for normal ARM deployments.
Yeah, it will. That would be tricky to accomplish because what we do for export is we just query what's in the resource group, and that's an ARM request. So we would need to figure out how to query graph, and the ask makes sense, but not likely to happen anytime soon. But Dan, maybe we can figure out Dan and Stephanie something.
I guess I'd also like to understand: would there be an expectation that you'd be able to go to the Entra portal, for example, and click on a resource, be looking at a resource there and export that to Bicep?
I mean, is it possible? Because it would be handy.
not today, but if enough people want it and it's a heavily requested feature, then it starts bubbling up in our our set of in our backlog, then maybe.
And that's probably more achievable than integrating with template export. So if that's good enough, that's good information to understand.
Yeah.
That would definitely be good enough
you,
for
Alex.
my use case.
Okay. Yeah, so Philip, please feel free to go and file a feature request on our repo.
Cool. Thanks, Philip. Stan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, on relation to that feature, maybe it would be good if you have that JSON view that you have for Azure resources, but for graph resources, it might be useful to just figure out the current properties without having to, in case, going to the graph API and query it.
Yep. That makes sense.
All right. Is there anything else? Otherwise, we can move on to the next topic. Let me see if I can take control because it's actually, yes, there you go. It's actually the PowerPoint.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Mate?
Yep. Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Mate Barbash, and I'm one of the PMs behind AVM, and we have two quick topics for today. The first one is really just that we want to mention that we start to have our own series of AVM community calls. The first occasion took place roughly a week ago, and you can see the short link here that points to the site that lists the recording. I'd recommend watching it. There were some really nice conversations with some MVPs who are already heavily using AVM modules, and they shared their experiences. And there were like overall some important information shared about the program there. And the second topic is that we are actually in the process of introducing a new module classification or type, which will be called utility module. So you can see the short link here that points to the already existing page on the AVM website that is listing the two already existing classifications, which used to be resource modules and pattern modules. So the intent with this new utility module would be to implement a way to have reusable functions or routines in a compact format that can then be reused by resource modules or pattern modules. A good example for this would be a function, let's say, that retrieves an endpoint of an API or a portal of a given environment. And we also see it as we need to apply some restrictions so we don't end up having like monsters under this category. So we basically say that a utility module must not deploy any Azure resources other than deployment scripts. So this is still very early days right now. If you visit this AKMS/AVM/module classifications page, you literally will see this definition that I quoted here, plus some like additional information. But in the coming weeks/months, we are definitely going to need to work more on the actual specifications, like functional and non-functional specifications, the CI environment aspect of it, etc. So we are going to gradually introduce it, but the thinking framework is roughly this, that we need something really self-contained that allows us to have like these very targeted functions or routines that can be then, again, reused across the board. So that's pretty much it from us. The question here is if you have any feedback regarding this new module type or any questions.
There's a longstanding ask to update the environment function in particular, which has always been this kind of weirdly maintained list of endpoints in the different like types of clouds of Azure, whether it's public or government or there are others. So one of the first use cases for the utility module is to have a more easily updatable source for environment data. So one, we'll take what's in the environment function already, but we'll add to it, and then we'll be able to take external contributions for it. So it's going to make it a lot easier to maintain that.
Right. Thank you for that addition, Alex. With?
Potentially a silly question. How does a utility module differ from just a PowerShell deployment script?
It'll all be written in Bicep, so it'll all just execute in the deployments runtime.
We use utilities for things like taggings and some standard function calls.
Cool.
I don't know if I answered your question the way that you were looking for.
I'll just have to read more about it.
But
it's essentially like if you would have otherwise done like a user-defined function or some complex logic in the Bicep file, you can offload it into a module separately.
Yeah, exactly. So the main goal is what Alex just summarized. But actually, as we are seeing it right now, we want to keep it open for those type of PowerShell modules as well that you can just run from deployment scripts. So obviously, as we are going to make progress with the definition and like more tangible requirements, we will need to factor in these scenarios as well. Jack?
Yeah, I think one other important note as well is that any of you who are using AVM will know that the shared interfaces are something that every module owner has to maintain. And that's something that we see as a great use case for using utility modules as, where we could define the type for the shared interface in a single place that the core team can update and maintain, and then folks can import that at some stage. So not going to happen right now. There's still some things that we need to work out, but that's also an intent that we have of the new utility module type as well. So yeah, so Simon, to sort of your question, in a way, yes, but not all of them. We actually are looking for some other things to happen with user-defined types so that we don't have to declare as many of them as manually, and we can look up API schemas instead to make that very easy. But all ongoing, and hopefully we'll get some good news soon.
Thanks, Mate. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to our last topic since we only have less than 10 minutes left. So yeah, thanks AVM team. Appreciate you guys taking the time to talk at our community call. Cool. PC?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. So a while back, we shipped the deployment pane as an experimental feature in Visual Studio Code. Briefly, for folks who are not aware of the deployment pane, you can click this icon here and open up the deployment pane, and you can pick a scope, go ahead and pick a, let's say, a resource group and change any of the parameters defined here, like, you know, like I'll pick our parameter files or whatever, and you can deploy the Bicep file. Okay. We are getting questions like, you can also right-click deploy, and you cannot, I can show you, because I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with that. You can go and deploy the right-click deploy the Bicep file as well. So the questions we are getting is, so when do I use deployment pane versus the right-click deploy? Can we have just one way to do the same thing? It makes a lot of sense to us to consolidate to a single experience. We want to focus resources to maintain just one deploy flow. And two, we don't want to confuse folks with two ways of doing the same thing. Now, no decision has been made yet. We just want to get some idea from the community. If we were to consolidate to one experience, meaning when we right-click deploy, we go to the same, either we open the deployment pane or we just, go with the old deploy flow. So which do you prefer? I will post the options in chat for you to like or vote. Okay, so I appreciate you can let us know. Alrighty, that's all.
Thanks, PC. Yeah, it looks like most people are saying deployment pane. So thanks everyone for voting on that. It's always good to get feedback. Awesome. So our only requested update was was for the language version 2.0. There's some syntax feedback on like different types of syntax as well as symbolic names. We're looking into it and we're trying to figure out prioritization on you know, when to focus on these and which ones to focus on first. But we're still investigating that. I don't know if Johnny or Anthony have anything more to say on that.
I mean, nothing really to add. I mean, I think we understand the importance of the problem, and I think we need to figure out the correct solution to it. I think we've had some comments on, you know, it should really be transparent whether you're using language version 1 or language version 2. There shouldn't really be any sort of noticeable migration. So we're currently just thinking that through. It's just a little bit of a complex problem.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. That was all for updates. So I could just open it up for Q&A for everyone. If there are no other questions, we can probably just end it here. Last call for questions. You can raise your hand. Jan?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask in general, because the question came up multiple times in the chat from me as well, regarding the extensibility timeline, because we mentioned extensibility a few times now, but I'm not sure if the question was completely answered regarding the roadmap for extensibility, as well as for Microsoft providers and Microsoft services like GitHub or Azure DevOps, as well as third-party services or APIs to integrate into Bicep extensibility.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we have to get finished with extensibility before we can focus on more providers. But we do want to know which providers you guys would like us to focus on next. So knowing that Azure DevOps and GitHub is definitely helpful for us for prioritization. But we need to finish a couple more things to support within extensibility, like portal, stacks, some other things within extensibility before we can focus on building a new provider support. But yeah, that being said, we will put more things on our list, and it looks like DevOps should be the next one that we focus on. So we'll look into that as well. And that being said, yeah, Anthony, Shenglong, if there's anything else you wanted to add, please do. Cool. Hopefully that answered your question. Any other questions? All right. Thanks everyone for showing up. I really appreciate this. Every month we love getting all this feedback, and there's so much activity in the chat, and I love it. Thanks everyone. See you all next month.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Thank you, everyone.